Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Meeks with Everbridge, and welcome to the webinar today. This is part 3 of our 3-part series on active shooter preparedness. If you'd like to watch parts 1 and 2, you can find the link to register for them in your invite email or in our resource center. I have a little housekeeping before we begin. We'll be recording the session and making it available on demand after today. The slides will also be available for download. You'll get an email within 24 hours with the recording and slides. Also, we will be accepting audience questions and we'll try to answer a few of them at the end of the session. So please feel free to submit questions in the question box as you think of them. If we are unable to get to your question, we'll be sure to have someone follow up with you directly. Today, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Eric Alberts. Eric is a dedicated emergency manager who's passionate about the field he works in and protecting those he serves. He began his career in emergency management in 2002 and has responded to emergencies of all different types and sizes, including a terrorist attack, hurricanes, the pandemic, a shooting in a hospital, mass casualty incidents, and more. He's currently the Senior Director of Emergency Management at Orlando Health in Central Florida. Eric was on the front line of the emergency and medical response to the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016. Today, he'll be sharing his experience and expertise in active shooter response. Okay, let's jump into the presentation. Eric, please take it away.
Well, good day to everybody, and thank you for being here today. To be honest with you, it's sad that we even have to have these conversations, but unfortunately we do. So the objectives for today's webinar are to learn how your hospital can better prepare for and respond to mass casualty incidents. And so in doing that, we're going to discuss how to prepare for and lead a team through a disaster. We're going to talk about creating capacity, and in that, patient surge strategies to better assess and treat patients from arrival through destination of surgery, intensive care units, and beyond. Work with local law enforcement and government authorities to develop a comprehensive emergency management plan, or CEMP. And lastly, to assess and make continuous updates to strengthen your organization's preparedness. So in order to talk about this whole realm of preparedness, you really have to know what is required of your facilities. Now, a lot of this discussion today is centric towards healthcare and healthcare emergency management, but it also applies to all other industries. And so with that, specifically with healthcare, talking about healthcare emergency management, there are a lot of statutory, regulatory, and accreditation requirements that we really have to meet every single calendar year. And so all the work that we do this whole calendar year is encapsulated by the end of it. And then as we get into January 1st of next year, it starts all over again. And just a little snapshot of some of those requirements is on the screen for you. So federally here in the United States, we have the CMS Emergency Preparedness Requirements for Medicare and Medicaid participating providers and suppliers. As far as your state, every state is a little different. Sometimes there are state healthcare administration, Department of Health, or building. State of Florida, we have the Agency for Healthcare Administration, or AHCA. Locally, through the Offices of Emergency Management, and oftentimes the Department of Health, where they use state requirements, but also add the little local flavor to those emergency management requirements. Obviously, one of the big ones for us, especially at Orlando Health, is the Joint Commission. They have a whole chapter on emergency management, and that chapter begins at EM.09.01.01. Additionally, the NFPA, National Fire Protection Administration, there's a whole chapter related to healthcare emergency management, Chapter 12 of the 99 Healthcare Facilities Code. The American College of Surgeons, through the Disaster Planning and Management. American Burn Association has some, CARF, which is for rehab, and the list goes on and on and on. These are just a small caption of some of the requirements that we have, and these requirements really do set the backbone of the overall emergency management program for healthcare. And so if you're able to meet these requirements, you really do have the framework and the structure there to really have a sound program and ensure that your organization is able to respond when disaster calls. And so again, all these ensure compliance. And really the biggest thing is we have to treat all this as if it's not just a check in the box, okay? Especially the new Joint Commission chapter that was released July 1st of this year is really pursuant to having all hazards plan that is and program that is not just a check in the box, but an overall systematic approach and a programmatic approach to how your organization is going to be prepared and respond, recover, and mitigate said disasters. And so all of this stuff really can and has saved lives. And again, these lay the background to everything that we should do in healthcare emergency management. Now, if you're not in healthcare emergency management, if let's say you're in the airport, airplane industry, you have to follow FAA requirements. If you're part of the schools, universities, and colleges, you have CLEAR Act. So really this goes back to finding the requirements you have to do your emergency management job, which will help ensure the backbone, which can and has saved lives. And so with all of these requirements, they really do help set some core tenets. And the first one on the top left is a risk assessment. Really in healthcare, we use the HVA model, the hazard vulnerability analysis. And this really does set the baseline for all of our actions that follow throughout the whole calendar year. We do this here in our organization at the beginning of every calendar year, and we include internal and external stakeholders when we do this. And we go through this process, we identify all of the relevant threats, hazards, and ultimately the high level percentage of risk from those hazards and threats at each of our hospital locations. That really does help us with everything else that's on this slide. Next is emergency planning. If you notice here, the first bullet point, there's actually 3 different names. It's all the same thing. The reason it has 3 different names is because of all those requirements I just mentioned on the previous slide. They all call it different things, but in essence, it's the same thing. And one thing that we really do here within our organization, and I like to challenge everybody with, is do you do reality planning? And in that, do you not just do like high level, hey, we're just going to throw everything at this disaster, even if you don't have it? Or do you really look at what common programs, systems, personnel, resources, equipment you really have to respond to the disaster and build your plans based on that? That's really what you should do. We have hospital emergency management councils at each one of our hospitals, and we also have a corporate emergency management council that all those sites filter up to. This council really helps set the tone of our overall program and everything we do throughout the whole year. And then lastly, under emergency planning is ensuring you have enough emergency supplies. That includes mass casualty incident surge carts based on patient level and acuities that you may see within your hospitals. And on the last on the left is policy and procedures. Do you have specific policy and procedures telling your staff exactly what to do and not do in times of crisis? Internally, we have roughly 36 emergency operation plan policy and procedures that help all of our staff know what to do in times of disaster. On the right-hand side of the screen, we see communications plan. This really helps us identify how we're with our patients, our staff, our visitors, vendors, contractors, and community partners like law enforcement, fire rescue, emergency management, and more. Training and testing, they're really specific to how we train our staff, but also how we actually practice all of our plans based upon our training and the policies that we've got. And then after that, we actually do an after action or AAR to identify all the areas of improvement, as well as especially those things we did well, because we want to continue to build on them. And then lastly on this slide is agreements and understandings. So do you have memorandums of understanding, agreement, contracts, and also letters of intent? Again, it takes all of these core tenets to ensure that we meet the requirement. So right now, we'd just like to pose a poll question for you, and I'll just defer over to the question.
Yeah, so does your organization have a comprehensive emergency response plan? Yes, not yet, or maybe you're developing one right now. We'll give you guys a few minutes to respond. All right. So it looks like most people, 73%, do have a comprehensive emergency response plan. 9% say not yet, and 18% are developing one right now.
Very good. Thank you for your participation in that survey. So the next piece in really ensuring that you're prepared is to get educated. And there's many, many free learning opportunities out there to really help you know your role as well as the requirements of your role better. One of the ones we really like to elaborate on and use within our organization is FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association, or Agency, excuse me. And they've got EMI, but also CDP. And referenced here for healthcare is the Center for Domestic Preparedness with the web link there. And you can see the courses that we really gravitate towards within our healthcare organization here. Also, there's the Texas Engineering Exchange, or TEEX. They have some really good courses. And then also FEMA has their Professional Development Series and their Advanced Professional Development Series. Again, some of this on the screen is relevant toward hospitals and healthcare. However, these educational institutions also provide free training for all the different sectors that are out there pretty much. So please take a look at those websites. There's a lot of great information out there and a lot of great ways to learn. Next piece about it, getting educated, is obviously on the top of the list there with NIMS compliance. So NIMS compliance plagues many individuals and organizations, and NIMS is the National Incident Management System. And so with that, there's a series of training courses that you can take to help better educate yourself and your staff. It goes all the way from 100 all the way through 800 level courses. And lastly, the 449 is the Train the Trainer. So these are really good reference points to be able to help you understand the whole method and mechanism for properly responding to emergency situations. Another way to get educated is really to study and learn from after action reports from major incidents that have occurred really just inside the United States, but also the world. And some examples here may include Paul's tragedy from 2016, Las Vegas shooting incident, the Boston bombings, and there's so many more these days that we can reference. When you go to those after action reports, you can actually learn a lot from them. And that also helps you build your program. And also at times, it's even helped me identify some areas that may be shortfalls for our organization and our program. So they really do help, and it is worth the time to go ahead and read them and study them. And it is important to know that this whole educational piece is a continual process. And so I've met a lot of people, peers and other emergency managers through the years who have said, I've already been through that training, I'm done. I'm not going to take any more. I've been in this field for so long, I don't need any more. I already know all that stuff. Guess what, everybody? That's not true. We always have to learn, we have to grow, we've got to develop, and that includes ourselves. And lastly, on this slide for getting educated, is to study the requirements. I keep mentioning this numerous times, but the one here is pursuant to the Joint Commission. As mentioned, the Joint Commission has updated the emergency management chapter and standards for hospitals and critical access hospitals as of July 1st of this year. And when you go ahead and read these standards, they really help elaborate what they are looking for as far as an emergency management program that is all hazards, looking at many different aspects. And one of the biggest pieces of this whole thing is leadership and trying to get leadership buy-in and support of the emergency management program. And so they really have to have oversight, and they've got to support this overall program. And then lastly, there are workbooks from the Joint Commission that are able to be downloaded or purchased to help provide more activities, templates, and tools to help you if you really don't feel like you're compliant, you need a lot of assistance. And so the next piece of this being prepared process is to really know more about your role. And so with that, I'd like to recommend everybody to keep a copy of and really reference your job description. If you think it's only a term of employment where you just read it and you just come on board and that's the end of it, you never have to study it again, well, you're pretty much a miss. I'm sure there's probably a couple things on there that you may not perhaps know or do 100%, or the organization may not be ready with. So really just try and optimize that. What's on the job description that we're not doing that we should, or can really leverage and do better about? Next reference piece is to talk to your direct leader about your role and what they envision it to be. So obviously we have the job description, but it's very important to have that one-on-one candid discussion with your leader and just say, hey, where do you envision me? Where do you envision this program 1, 3, 5, 10 years from now? Where do you want us to go? What are the main areas that you want us to focus on as we develop the program? Another one is to work with senior leadership to identify their priorities for your role and ascertain their level of support. Again, I can't elaborate how important it is to have senior leader and administrative support for the overall program. If senior leaders do not support the program, you're really pretty much stuck. You're not going to be able to advance, you're not going to be able to move it forward, and you're not going to continue to build on the program. And coordinate and collaborate with community partners, and some of which are authority having jurisdictions for your facility. So in other words, wherever your facilities are located, go to the level of government that services that area. So our downtown campus is in Orlando, Florida. And so for that piece, I would go to the city of Orlando and talk to their Office of Emergency Management. If I was in the county, it would be Orange County, and I would go to Orange County Office of Emergency Management and work with them. And so it's really important to build those collaboration points with your community partners to ensure that you're heading in the right direction and you know your role. And lastly, you really want to identify where you fit into the big picture. You want to own it, okay? You want to know where the organization is going, where it's building, where it's developing, where it's investing its money, and find ways as to how your position or your role or you can fit into that. How can you make sure that your program is viable and will long live within your organization? So I believe right now we're going to ask one more additional question as a survey.
Sorry about that. If you have an emergency response plan in place, how often do you practice? Yearly, multiple times per year, or almost never? We'll give a few more seconds to get some more votes in. Okay. It looks like we have a wide range here. So 39% saying they practice yearly, 29% saying multiple times per year, and 31% saying almost never.
Okay, thank you for that. Definitely a lot of area for opportunity there.
Yes.
All right, so the next piece of the preparedness puzzle is learning about your organization and the community it serves. So as far as your organization, I really have to know the foundation of why it's there. What is its mission, vision, and values? What are the strategic imperatives? Where are they heading? Where do they want to go? How does it function on a day-to-day basis? How does it operate? And as far as hospitals, really understand your patient populations. Who does it serve? You know, what are some of the general levels of acuity? Are you known as an inner city hospital, or are you known as a rural facility, which is very small with very limited number of beds and resources? And also part of this whole discussion, we have to really look at its dependencies on others. How reliant are you on suppliers of services, those that provide things to your organization? And then we look at the community. We've got to look at the community that the healthcare facility resides in. Is it in a growing city that is going to continue to build grow, develop, and introduce new hazards like flying aircraft that are all automated with huge lithium batteries such as drones? Or are you in a rural area that is basically a farming land that you do not think is going to be able to build or grow in the next several years? That does help you understand how things are. Also, the emergency or disaster history of your organization and community. Sometimes, especially when you get a new role, you have to go to school. And with that, you got to look in history. I know history is tough for many individuals, but it also can be fun. And so with that, you have to look for historians. Sometimes historians work inside your organization, and sometimes you may have to go to a library or ask a librarian who some local historians are. These all really do help you understand the organization and the community it serves. And then lastly, just having a high-level review of the community hazards, threats, and special events that are brought to your area. Whether it's a small localized town parade that happens every Christmas, or it's actually a big party affiliation to a political party and a big huge nation vote that's going to happen. Also threats, there's a lot of threats that are happening across the United States and the world right now. Are they affecting your community, and have they affected your organization? Those are all really important pieces to knowing your preparedness puzzle. And so the biggest piece of this whole preparedness realm is the collaboration. Working with government and our community representatives almost every single day is paramount. And you notice there's a lot of different entities on the screen here, but that includes emergency management, law enforcement, fire rescue, hazmat, Department of Health. Also in healthcare, it's healthcare coalitions, those that represent our area or region. And another big one is the National Weather Service. Not sure if a lot of people on the call know, but they actually have a Storm Ready program. And that program is free. And through that process, you can get some good training and education. It also helps ensure that you're ready for future weather emergencies. So it all is a really good program. It does provide good assistance to how you continue to build your preparedness. So again, collaboration is key. And the bottom line to this is you cannot do everything by yourself. It's going to require a lot of assistance and support from all those listed on the screen as well as many others. So take advantage of it. Take any opportunity you can to learn, grow, network, and collaborate with all these partners. And so when you think about collaboration and how it is really important, the bottom line to this is really the first point on this slide. If you don't know, work, and collaborate with your partners, they're not going to know you. They're not going to want to work with you, and they ultimately won't trust you during times of emergencies or disasters. So spending the extra time to get them to know them now is really extremely important. And you've probably heard this or read this many times, but if you show up in an incident or an exercise that is a very high level and you start handing out your cards at that time, it's not the time. They probably don't want to even focus on that. They don't have the mental capacity to think about it. They may shrug you off, and they may not even really shake your hand at that time because they're too busy and they don't know you. They don't trust you. So forming these relationships ahead of time is really, again, so key in the response to an emergency. We learned this really critically during the Pulse tragedy in 2016. The partnerships that we had with the FBI and many other organizations, both state, federal, and local, really did help us in a response to that tragedy. And then working with other healthcare emergency managers in your area, really to learn and benchmark and train and plan together. Let's build that team. So here locally, there's another major healthcare organization down the street from us and all around our community. And we don't see them as like enemies or the bad guy. We really try to include them, and we try to partner with them, and we try and plan with them. And most recently, we're building a family assistance and family reunification plan. We've really been working with them to leverage our knowledge and our skills and abilities to make this the best plan, not only for our organization individually, but our whole community. So that's why it's so important to do these collaboration efforts. And so if we actually prepare ourselves, we're able to help lead our teams through a disaster. And so really with this, if you know and are compliant with all those requirements that I mentioned before, like CMS, Joint Commission, state, local accreditation, you have the proper training, as we mentioned before, like FEMA and TEACS. You know your own role. You've studied the job description. You've talked to your leader. You've talked to other senior leaders. You work with others, not just community partners, but also in competitive organizations to yours. Really, and understand your organization and how it operates on a normal day and the area and community that it serves. You have a much greater chance of having a better knowledge base and be more confident to lead your team through before, during, and after a disaster. And so I can't elaborate enough about how important it is to coordinate and collaborate with community partners and other organizations like yours during a disaster. Use your partnerships, okay? Just because you've maybe called them before and you want to look like you're the best in the whole world doesn't mean that's the right thing to do for your community you're serving. So when things get really bad and you need help, contact them, call them, just ask for help, and that actually shows strength in your abilities to act as a leader. And so the last piece, or one of the last pieces here, is your presence during a disaster really dictates the overall team's reactions and response to that disaster. And so with that, if you don't physically show up, you're not in the room, you're not present, they won't mentally show up either. And their performance will directly reflect that. So again, if they don't see you and know that you're part of the puzzle and the equation, they're not going to really care, and they're not going to want to be invested in it. They're not going to want to help. If you go into the situation, you show a lot of fear, anxiety, you don't speak well at all, you're just fumbling with your words, you're panicking, you're sloppily dressed, meaning you're badly dressed, you look disheveled, the clothes are all dirty. If you come in really abrasive and aggressive, they're going to see this. They're going to look right through that, and they're going to know that. And so the confidence in you and your role and your ability to help lead the organization is not going to be effective or the same. And so the contrary to that is if you show everything here, the calmness, the composure, the strength, you're well-dressed, you're attentive to the needs, it's really going to be evident to everybody that's there responding with you, and it's actually going to be able to help calm them down. They're going to be able to say, you know what, they're doing okay, they're here with me, they're partnering, they're helping, they're being calm. You know what, if they're okay, he or she are okay, I'm going to be okay too. As a team, we can do this. And then lastly is to really help establish a strong, and this HICS here is the Hospital Incident Command System, and the ICS is the Incident Command System team, by basing your organization on the organizational charts. So if you want to identify who should be doing what role, look at your organization's charts as far as daily job responsibilities. Look at job descriptions and roles. What are they doing on a daily basis? And then also doing a reality check on who's able to perform what function. Are they actually able to fulfill that role? It looks like they should be able to based on their daily job within the organization, but we know that person and they really couldn't handle it in times of crisis. So these are all the things that really do help you lead during times of a disaster or a crisis. And so this whole preparedness piece really does help create capacity, your ability to help higher levels of individuals during times of crisis. And so in hospitals, that means being able to provide strategies for patient surge, to really assess and treat patients upon arrival, all the way through their destination of care. And so typically patients come into the hospital through the emergency department, through ambulance or by walking in, and then they're assessed inside the emergency department, and they may be sent to imaging where they'll get an x-ray, an MRI, or CAT scan, and then from that they will go to either surgery, the ICU, or a med-surg unit, or may even be discharged from the hospital. So those are some of the core routes that patients may go through. But think about this on a higher level when we're talking mass casualty incidents, such as what we experienced in Pulse, Vegas, Boston, and many other incidents. And so with that, there's a lot of things you can do to help build this whole capacity for surge, meaning more patients coming into your organization. And so one of the ways is to actually create a worksheet for surge at each hospital. And in that, you identify the licensed beds, the standard operational beds, what do you normally operate with, or how many beds you normally have open, potential surge beds, where can we escalate up to, what other beds or rooms can we use? Look at other service lines. Maybe there's certain service lines that don't use all their area, so you could use them in times of crisis. Remote telemetry capability. Are you able to use electronic devices to monitor patients' conditions remotely? In-room O2 or oxygen, suction, air, etc. And this really does help provide a picture of where can we go from here. Not only what we've got now, but where can we escalate up to? And then lastly, as we talked about that whole reality planning piece, just be honest, okay? If you need help, do what you need to do and just speak clearly. Drop the codes, the 10 codes, the abbreviations, and just say what you need. In this reference here, we're talking about making overhead public address or PA announcements and just state the fact. All trauma staff respond to the trauma room, and then any available staff respond to the emergency department. And you may be asking, well, I can't see us being able to do that, or when do you think you might have done that? We actually did both of those when the Pulse tragedy occurred in 2016. So we had to use both. Obviously, the first one there being the trauma staff to the ED or the trauma room, and secondarily, any staff to respond to the ED. And that really did help us with our staffing inside the emergency department. So again, just be honest. And part of this whole piece of creating capacity is to really make sure you have the right system set up. And with that, you need to ensure that you have a trauma surgeon, a surgeon, or a attending physician, or a physician conducting triage on patients outside the emergency department before the patients come in to really help identify the next step that the patient will have to go through as far as care and the timing of that step. In other words, if you have a patient that's coming in at a green level acuity, which is a walking wounded, no major incident, then they may be able to be delayed, okay? However, if you have a red trauma alert patient, that means their life is at risk and at any second or moment they may die. So obviously the red trauma alert type patient should take precedence and go into care in the right room at the right time. The next piece of this slide in the middle is really just reference to the golden hour for patients with traumatic injuries. So I don't know if you've heard of this before, but there's a golden hour rule. And what that means is between the time of incident to 1 hour after that is the time that patients really need to receive better care to ensure that their life is really to be able to be sustained or maintained. So if a patient is shot out on scene or dramatically injured, if they are not brought to a trauma center or a hospital within 1 hour's time, their likelihood of surviving that said incident is not very high. So always remember that golden hour for care and treatment. And again, as mentioned, really just trying to develop a surge plan. We mentioned a worksheet, but now let's build upon that. With that analysis that you've done, go and actually talk to the departments, like the emergency department, ICU, med surg, and many others, and just ask them, does this bed component look right? What kind of staffing are we going to need? How many medical doctors are we going to need to actually make this work? What kind of equipment are we going to need? And then what kind of resources do we need to get here to expand this whole process of being able to care for more patients than what we do right now? So this really does help us in building our capacity to really help surge up for our community and provide more services for more people. And so I think now's a good time to encapsulate really kind of on a high level what we experienced with the Pulse nightclub tragedy. And so on Sunday, June 12th, 2016, here in the city of Orlando, there is a nightclub called the Pulse nightclub. And on the early morning hours of Sunday, June 12th, it was Latin night. And the Pulse nightclub caters to the LGBTQ plus community. And during Sunday, June 12th, it was actually Latin night inside the club. So there was a myriad of individuals there from all walks of life and community. They're just trying to have a good time. And so a terrorist, and he was actually defined as a terrorist by the Federal Bureau of Investigation after the incident, actually started shooting inside the Pulse nightclub at 2 a.m. Now, one little thing about this, a lot of people think that the terrorist actually went and targeted this club first, and they targeted this type of community, or the community that really congregates in this nightclub. And so those facts are actually not facts, they're rumors. This is actually the third nightclub that the individual went to commit their act. The other two locations they had targeted, there was too much law enforcement presence. And so this whole process of them determining where to go was actually just a Google web search where they picked the top nightclubs in Orlando. Pulse just happened to be third on the list. So at 2 a.m., the first shots were fired inside the Pulse nightclub. At 2:14, we had received our first patient at ORMC, the Orlando Regional Medical Center, which is a level 1 trauma center. If you look at the map on the right-hand side, you'll see on the left-hand portion of that picture there, this little sign and also the actual club itself. This is where Pulse nightclub is. And if you go down just about 3 blocks, right up the road on the left is where ORMC is. So you can see how close the level 1 trauma was to the incident, which was very fortunate for the patients. And so as we move forward a little bit now to 222, we actually activated a mass casualty or MCI plan with a shooting up to 20 patients. That was our first notification that we had sent out, big level on a high level for this incident. At 2:35, the shooter had contacted 911 from inside the Pulse nightclub. And when he was doing that, he actually made additional threats. He said that he had bombs outside in his vehicle, outside in the parking lot. He had bombs strapped to himself, suicide vest, and he also said that he had hostages inside the club. So when he did that, he posed more threats or issues for first responders, creating more teams to be assembled and respond into the incident. At 3:07, we had received our first wave of 38 patients from the Pulse nightclub at ORMC. However, what this does not tell you is we actually received 36 patients in 36 minutes. So every minute for 36 minutes straight, we received a red trauma alert, the highest level acuity patient you could receive. Again, 36 minutes straight. At 3:14, we had activated our hospital incident command system. And some of you may be asking, what the heck took you all so long? And the first, the response to that, and the first thing you got to think about in response to a disaster is the #1 priority, and that is life safety, trying to save as many lives as possible. And that's what we were doing. At 5:15, the shooter was down inside the nightclub. And at 5:19, we had received our second wave of Pulse patients at ORMC. And so the little caveat there again on the right is that ORMC is no more than half a mile from the Pulse nightclub, and our HICS, Hospital Incident Command System, was activated for 34 hours and 48 minutes. We responded to the Pulse nightclub incident for 9 days straight. And so a lot of people ask, what did you learn from Pulse? Well, actually, we learned a lot. From the Pulse nightclub tragedy, we completed a after action report, or AAR. The AAR for Pulse was 51 pages and included 66 areas for improvement. Some of those are listed here on this screen for you. And so we've always got to be concerned about HIPAA compliance or HIPAA violations. We deal with any kind of everyday walk of life in a hospital, but also especially during disasters. And so HIPAA is really related to patient data being safe and kept safe and not being shared. So it's confidential, and they feel safe and comfortable to be in your healthcare organization receiving care. Road closures. There's a lot of road closures when these types of things happen. And with this incident, we actually had to have staff come into the hospital from around the incident. So they couldn't come on the main roadways, Orange Avenue, to get here. They had to go around it on side streets to come up from the north to come south to get to the hospital. Timely updates to phone operators. We actually received 6,000 phone calls inside our PBX switchboard on Sunday, June 12th, between the hours of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. The next day, we received 5,000 phone calls on our main switchboard. People want to provide a lot of support. They want to provide gifts, they want to provide food. In the beginning stages, we had 50 pizzas show up at the main entrance of ORMC. Well, this was a terrorist incident. We had to be worried about terrorism, obviously, and poisoning of our staff. So we told our staff not to eat the food. Blood is a huge commodity and very important in times of crisis. So oftentimes you'll hear after disaster, donate blood. Well, really, everybody, we should be donating blood now because it needs to be processed and stored. And so you've got it when times of crisis actually happen. Supporting the needs of the family. The Family Assistance and Family Reunification Center moved 5 times after a pulse. And so this really does play a huge factor on supporting the families, their concerns, their issues, and frustrations. The unexpected costs of said incidents are huge. In our response to Pulse, we spent $5.5 million, and we asked for reimbursement through the state, through the federal government, and we were denied. Ultimately, we spent over $9 million on the response, and that included patient care for those that were unable to afford it. We realized that we have to engage organizations that are related to the incident location. The close proximity to the incident really led to no notice for us. We didn't have time to prepare. We got notified of the incident actually after we received our first patient. So we did not have a lot of prep time to get ready. The 2 weeks of media presence on our campus was very invasive. And if you look at the photo on the bottom right, you'll see the media. And this is Orange Avenue, away from Pulse. So Pulse would be back here. If you look forward there, you'd actually see the hospital on the left. The whole road is actually closed there because of the media. That was not a crime scene. Again, that is just the media. And so with this, we had about 100 CNN reporters outside the hospital alone. Altogether, we had about 300 to 400 media reps outside the hospital for 9 days straight. Post-security impact, we've had to do a lot with security here throughout time. And with that now, if you come into an Orlando Health facility, especially on our downtown campus, you will be met by security wearing bulletproof vests, and you will have to go through a walk-through metal detector, and you'll have to put your belongings in your bags through x-ray machines. And then lastly, team members asking us, why didn't you call me? Well, during the time of Pulse and before Pulse, we did not have a mass notification system to alert our staff of times of crisis. Well, this was documented inside the after action report. And fortunately for us, we were able to then get a notification system, being Everbridge. And we have been using Everbridge ever since the time of the Pulse. We've got approved for it in learnings from the Pulse tragedy. And we continue to build that program now throughout our healthcare organization. And again, I mentioned the after action report, again, 51 pages, 66 areas of improvement. And we actually corrected all of those items as of February 2019. And some of you may be asking, what the heck took you so long again to do this? Well, a lot of these issues that we identified in the Pulse tragedy were big nationwide issues. And so with that, it takes a very long time to put your arms around it, put good plans, collaboration, and process together. And so on the list here are just some of those: patient identification, family assistance processes. And again, I mentioned this whole new plan, this whole family reunification and assistance plan. We had basic staples in our comprehensive emergency management plan and in our MCI plan, but now we have an individual plan just for family assistance and reunification. Mass notification system, we call it internally the Orlando Health Alert, but essentially it is Everbridge. We now have a foreign national program. So any patients that come in, we can help identify them as a foreign national if they are, and really just trying to help connect them up with their consulate services, because consulate offices can do a lot for foreign individuals that are inside your facilities. We have a critical incident response protocol. and team. So now if we have an incident, we can actually activate and deploy a psychological team to help care for our team members. And so with this, we're actually able to provide care, and we're able to connect them up to services, both the short term and the long term. And we have food nutritionists on there, we have pet therapy, we have social workers, we have licensed mental health practitioners, and many others. We have a donations plan, okay, that all ties back to a foundations fund. So if we actually need support, we're going to ask for donations, not for stuff like food, clothes, towels, and all that kind of stuff, because the funds are what we really need. And we've updated our policy and procedures and our supplies to meet the need based on what we learned from Pulse. And so from all these learnings, again, we have to continue to develop and push the envelope. We have to continue to push our system and try and do better every single day, every year, every month. And so with that, we really enhanced our exercises. The first one is our full-scale community exercise. And in that, we actually infuse our lessons learned from the Pulse nightclub strategy. We include patients being brought in by pickup trucks. We actually include people simulating or acting like family members. We actually use individuals speaking other languages, and we just bring a lot of stress into the system. And that, again, speaks here. We really try and tax everything we do, and we try and optimize everything that we learn from. And if you look on the right-hand side, those are just some photos from exercises that we have done at some of our sites, and you can see how we really try and push the envelope. And again, these are all volunteer victims, and we really just try and push our teams to really react and be ready for future instances. And we also have to plan for new threats. If you look at the news, you're going to see so much stuff that's happening in this world that we live in. Unfortunately, we have a lot of severe weather. We've got an increase in workplace violence. There's a lot of civil unrest still. There's tons of violence in our communities that we serve. It's sad to look at the news and watch and see all the shootings and the stabbings and the acts of aggression that we have in our community. Well, guess what? The hospitals all have to help care for that. And we're all microcosms of the community we serve. So guess what? The violence may end up coming here. Cybersecurity. Obviously, there's tons of cyber threats in our community that we serve. And lastly on the list is climate change. Again, if you've been looking at the news, you're going to see tons of announcements and articles and actually laws and acts now by the federal government about climate change. And so when you think about this, there's an escalation of heat, drought, scarcity of water, escalation of severe weather trends that we see, including tropical systems that will be much worse in the future. And we have to think about that inside our institutions, our organizations. Again, even if you're not in healthcare, you've got to be concerned about climate change. It's going to affect every one of us. And if you look at the news, even in the past couple of days, you're going to see some severe flooding out west, perhaps in Texas or Phoenix or some of the desert areas out west of the United States. And again, it'll say 1 in 1,000 year floods is what I'm seeing reference to. These are all elaborating some of these new trends and threats, especially with climate change, that we should not ignore. And so just to wrap up here, there's other resources that are available to find out more information. Obviously, you can go through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You can go through the Department of Health and Human Services ASPR Tracy program, and they even have a mass violence page if you want more information about acts of aggression and active shooter or active assailant incidents. The CDC has an emergency preparedness and response website. The federal CMS has an emergency preparedness role site. And we lastly have at Orlando Health a Pulse digital book. And so if you go on the website there, you'll find a video that our organization put together to help really illustrate how we responded, what we faced, and how we felt in response to the incident, as well as some snapshots from our critical areas like surgery, trauma, ED, administration, what we felt, how we responded, and what we learned, and some advice. So these are just some great resources for you to build on to help you build out your preparedness continuum. And so I know I went kind of fast. I really could speak to these items for days, weeks, but time is short today. And we really want to ensure that we have enough time for any questions. Before we get to this, did I miss any survey questions? Or is there anything that you think we should ask?
I think we'll go straight to our Q&A just for the sake of time. So our first question is, how do you get copies of AARs from various events? Like, can outside agencies look at AARs from various responding agencies?
Yeah, that is an outstanding question. And so with it, I've had many times where I've personally questioned that myself. And so, you know what? Even recently, I'll go on Google or I'll just go on the internet, like Safari, wherever you go to, and just type in, Pulse nightclub after action report, Pulse lessons learned, Las Vegas shooting after action report. And you'd be surprised how many official after action reports you can find online. Also, if you can't, it's always worth reaching out to that agency and just asking if they have a report they're willing to share or if they have one posted, because there are so many lessons learned from each of those and how we can improve our programs.
Awesome. Our next question is, what triage methods are used in your facilities?
Yeah, so we use Start and Jumpstart, but some use SALT, and then there's other variations of that as well. And the bottom line to that whole thing is you've got to find what triage system is going to work for you and your healthcare organization, which one aligns with your current processes and how you do it on a normal day.
Okay. Our next question is, in reference to the Pulse nightclub shooting, did staff have trouble parking or getting into the hospital to respond to the incident?
Yes, getting into the nightclub was an issue because of the law enforcement perimeter and the first responder vehicles in the area. And so with that, our staff had to go around the incident and in circular fashion come around and come into the hospital from the north. So if they were coming from the south, they had to go around it and come in from the north. And as far as parking, no, we did not. We have a lot of parking garages on our campus here, so they just park where they normally did and they ran into the hospital.
Did police check employee IDs? And was there a plan in place beforehand for traffic control? Is that something that you guys practice?
So we do practice with law enforcement quite a bit. We invite them to all of our exercises we do. However, in times of crisis like this, we all have to understand that their first response is always going to be to the scene. And if your site, your hospital, or your organization is not the site where the incident is, or the scene of the incident, then they're probably not going to be able to provide all that much support. Fortunately for us in Pulse, we were no more than half a mile from the nightclub, so we were able to get some additional law enforcement personnel here as they came in. And with that, just trying to ensure that the right people are coming into our facility. As far as checking IDs, though, no, that came back to our security staff. And they actually pulled some hand-wand metal detectors that they had. They weren't using at the time, but they actually picked them up and started using them in response to this.
Awesome. Our next question is, do you have staff take the NDLSF courses like BDLS and ADLS?
At this time, we do not. We use the basic, the BLS, ALS classes, but we do not practice with the disaster BLS and ALS at this time.
Okay. I think that those are all the questions that we have time for today. I would love to launch one final poll just to get a gauge on any, oh, sorry. This is one poll question that we didn't get to. So if you have an emergency response plan, do you have your senior leadership's support on it? And we have, well, I'll give a few minutes for voting, and then there is one more question after this. So Eric, as these answers are coming in, it looks like most people do have senior leadership support on it, but for it looks like 7 to 8% who don't. Do you have any recommendations for how to secure that?
Yeah, so my honest opinion is there's probably more than the 7 or 8% that want to admit it because it is a big problem across the nation, and not just pursuant to healthcare, but any industry. And so with that, my recommendation is to find that one advocate on senior leadership. Find a senior leader who's been in the military or been a firefighter or law enforcement officer or somebody that really cares about, you know, trying to be prepared for the community. Leverage those opportunities with that individual and then build upon it, grow it, and just become partners with them and collaborators, and just help them to help you build out your program. So don't try and do it alone. Seek help.
Wonderful. All right, and our last question is, would you be interested in any additional information about active shooter response? So that could be an ebook, a checklist, maybe a live demonstration via webinar, or a live webinar case study, or a one-on-one follow-up with an expert. All right. We still have some results trickling in, so I'll give another few seconds. And it looks like we have interest across the board, so we will be sure to take this into account when developing further resources for you all. That is all that we have time for. If we didn't get to your questions, we will be sure to have someone follow up with you. And as a reminder, we will be sending out the on-demand recording of this session as well as the slides. You should receive that email within 24 hours, and it will likely come from the GoToWebinar platform. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox. You can also find the recordings to all 3 webinars in the resource center of our website or in the invite emails you receive for the series. So with that, just want to thank you so much to Eric for your insights, and thank you to our audience for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Have a great one.
Thank you, everybody.